Alrighty guys, now I want to show you how to hook up one of these blue guys here. This is called a potentiometer. It's what is essentially a variable resistor. You can change the internal resistance of this device by twisting the little knob on top. And it's got three leads here that you can just plug into your variable. And so I'm going to try and get this potentiometer to control the brightness of this LED. Right now I've got this LED hooked up just like we've hooked up a billion LEDs so far. And right now it's just coded to be on. So hooking up the potentiometer is pretty much a piece of cake. There are 3 prongs. And what this thing is going to let us do, it's going to let us sense a range of values between twisting it one direction and twisting it all the way to the other direction. And so the lead of the potentiometer that I'm going to be able to sense these values from is actually the middle of the 3 leads. And I'm going to connect that to the analog input over here. I'm going to use A0 on this side of the board. Now the reason I'm using the analog inputs is, unlike the digital inputs, which we used with the push button, which can only be high voltage or low voltage, the analog inputs will let us sense a range between the high voltage on one side and the low voltage on the other side. And so I'm going to connect the other leads of my potentiometer just like that. One side of my potentiometer is going to be connected up to the 5-volt line on my Arduino, so the 5-volt output up here, and I'm going to connect the other lead of my potentiometer to ground. And so I've got that 5-volt range. If I twist my potentiometer all the way one direction, it should read a very low voltage close to the ground, 0 volts. And if I twist it all the way the other way, it should read something close to 5 volts. Now the actual values that this analog input is going to give me are integers between 0 and 1023. So we're talking about 10 bits of resolution. For those of you who are a little more computer science savvy. But all we need to know for right now is that this analog input in is going to read a value between 0 and 1023. So flipping over here to my code, let me go ahead and create a variable describing what analog input I'm connecting this to. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call this sensor pin. But I'm going to remember that the sensor pin is one of my analog input pins. So maybe I should make a comment there to remind myself that this should be connected to analog 0. Now, I don't have to worry about setting the pin mode for the sensor pin because these analog pins can only operate as outputs, whereas the digital input-output pins could be inputs or outputs. Don't have to worry about that for the analog pins. So let me go down here to my loop. What I'm trying to do is use this potentiometer to dim and brighten my LED. That's what I'm going to try to do with this little circuit. And so I know in order to do that, I need to connect to one of my analog digital outputs. They use the pulse width modulation. So I'm actually going to change this LED to pin 9. And again, I should just have to change that here, and as long as I'm using that LED pin variable somewhere here, we should be good to go. And then, of course, I want to use the analog write function to give a range of values to this LED between the low voltage and high voltage. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create myself a variable called val, and I'm going to store that val. I'm going to store the results of my analog input, whatever that senses, in this variable. So I'm going to do an analog read on my sensor pin. Now again, these are the only pins capable of doing an analog read, so there shouldn't be any confusion about what I'm actually reading. And so it'd be nice if I could just take this value that I read from the sensor pin and stick that in here in my analog write and use that as my brightness for the LED. The only problem here is that analog read is going to get a value between 0 and 1023, and analog write can write a value between 0 and 255, so corresponding between low and high voltage. So there's an easy way to convert between these two different range of values. It's something called a map. And so I can take this value, VAL, and I know this value, because it's using the analog read, has got a range from 0 to 1023. In order to use this in my analog write, I want to take this range and reduce it to a range of 0 to 255. And so that will output a new number between 0 and 255 that corresponds to the number between 0 and 1023. And what I'm going to do is just actually stick that back inside the val variable, save it, assign that to the val variable, and then when I use this val, I should be getting a number between 0 and 255. So this map function, maybe a little more advanced coding technique, but it's actually turns out to be something pretty useful when I'm trying to connect inputs to outputs, especially these analog inputs. Let me put in a short delay here. Let's see what this circuit does. Verify and upload. Now while that's working itself out, the direction that you have your potentiometer, I mean, you could switch around what's connected to high voltage, what's connected to low voltage. That doesn't matter as long as that middle pin is connected to the analog input. All right, super duper. All right, so something's going wrong with what I'm trying to work out. So let me do a little trick here to help debug my circuit. I'm going to open up the serial monitor. So in my setup, I'm going to do serial.begin and establish that line of communication between my Arduino and my computer. And what I'm going to try doing, because looks like this code should work for me, I'm going to actually print out this value to see what I'm getting. So I'm going to do serial.println and print out this VAL to the screen. See what's going on with this circuit. So let me try compiling that and uploading that again. Turn it on now. Alright, well, I don't know what went wrong with the circuit before, but nothing that I did just now should have any impact on the circuit whatsoever. Maybe it was just being super slow uploading. Okay, so now I've actually got a dimmer switch for my LED. So that makes it pretty easy to take this twist sensor and use this as an input and map that directly to a light, such as this LED, as an output. And this, of course, is using the analog input and the analog output. So this is one of the basic components of electronic control. Enjoy.